Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Elena, and I'm here to welcome you on how to close project budgets for the new year. Ask Me Anything. I am really excited to introduce Adriana Girdler. She's our guest for today, so welcome, Adriana.
Thank you so much, Elena. Really glad to be here.
So before I go ahead and we have more of a formal introduction of Adriana, I would just quickly like to mention our collaborator for this AMA, the Deliverable. So if you haven't heard of the Deliverable, it's a monthly newsletter aimed at providing project finance and operation managers with practical insights and tips on how to improve, track, and manage project performance. So if this is something that interests you, I have added a link in the chat. You will see it's pinned. So you can go ahead and subscribe to the newsletter through that link. And of course, lastly, before we continue, I would like to mention Beebole, who made this AMA possible. I know that some of you already know about Beebole, some of you already use Beebole, but for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are an all-in-one cloud solution for project time tracking. So with Beebole, you can track time by project, sub-project, and task, and also track costs and billing across clients and projects, and use integrations with Google and Excel as well. So now that we got this out of the way, I want to introduce Adriana formally. So Adriana, would you like to say a little bit about yourself as well?
Sure. I'm Adriana Girdler. I am the Chief Efficiency Officer and President of Cornerstone Dynamics, which is a project management and productivity consulting firm. And basically been doing this type of project work and obviously finances all the time we have to be looking at for over 2 decades now. So really understanding it well, knowing the nuances, and helping a lot of large organizations with their internal ways of working is what we do as an organization. So really focusing on how do we close the gaps on everything so that we can move things forward, because that's really ultimately what companies are trying to do, always reaching their objectives. I'm also the founder and creator of Slay Project Management, which is the only practical online project management course out there, as well as I have a YouTube channel, which really focuses on project management and how do we get better at that. So that's something that maybe Elena, you can put in the link.
Absolutely. You definitely have to check it out. There's some really nice and practical videos there. So they have actually helped me quite a lot. Especially, I have to say, during the COVID period, the pandemic period, when everything just went online. So she also has really great videos about productivity as well. So if you haven't checked it out, definitely do. Great. Thank you so much, Adriana. So just a reminder, you can add your questions in the chat and we will do our best to answer them. We see everything here, so don't worry. But until people are starting to formulating, their questions, I have a couple of questions for you, Adriana, from my side.
Absolutely. This is the ask away.
Perfect. So my first question is, and I think this is one of maybe the most important things when it comes to closing project budgets. So what are some of the common mistakes that project managers and finance managers as well make when wrapping up project budgets, and how can they really avoid them?
Yeah. So I don't want to group finance managers and project managers in the same bucket, because I would say finance managers are very aware of finances, maybe, whereas project managers, not to say they're not aware of finances, but they're also so focused on the deliverable and getting things done, which is real. It's not a mistake, it's a trap. So a lot of times, and I guess you can apply this really to anyone, we get so busy at the end of when we're wrapping up a project on the deliverable and everything that is being executed and the training that we potentially have to do and all the other stakeholders that are going to be impacted, that we tend to kind of lose the grasp of where are we financially, because we're so busy on the executing of the activity that we were tasked to do. The problem is this: at the end of the day, when the dust settles, you don't want to be in, retrieving information after the fact, because that can just lead to a lot of work and missed budget related items that you're needing. So It is to, even though you're busy executing and everything, is to ensure that you're still on top of it. Don't lose sight of tracking what you need to track, because it's so easy to think it's not important. But I promise you, it's like any type of documentation. At the end, when everything is done and the dust is settled, it's harder to collect all that information than if you were to just do a little every day, even when you're extremely busy wrapping it all up and getting the deliverable out there to your stakeholders.
Okay, you mentioned staying on track. So how do you make sure that you stay on track with your project budgets? Because I think that's one of the, well, let's say challenges, no? Especially if you're dealing with larger projects. How do you stay on track with your projects?
Yeah, well, again, we're focusing on budgets because there's
Yes.
obviously other things that you talk about in regards to projects. So when it comes to the projects and staying on track, it's knowing from the beginning what it is that you are going to be doing and the amount of money that you have spent. Through an Excel spreadsheet, whether it's even through Beebole and Beeble's tracking system that they have, being able to get that information and daily put it in what you're needing to do from the beginning, because you've already figured out what your resource spend is going to be. You already figured out here's exactly what we're supposed to be doing from a deliverable perspective. You've already done your scope and your charter, which are really key documents, which actually help with budgeting. Because you really break down all the things that you're going to be doing, so things are not a surprise. So it really is, as I said in the first answer, it's just keeping things on track. Like, don't lose sight of that, but you have to start from day one. And not only is it setting up what type of spreadsheet you're going to use, whether that's an Excel spreadsheet, a Beebole software, or anything else, it's have you really thought through what your project's going to be doing, so that it can equate to a budget. Because just having a number out there and not really being clear with what you're going to do is where you're going to get a lot of discrepancies, and things are just going to create and be a lot of issues for you. So if you have a real strong definition and breakdown of your project through your project charter, through the scope statement, and really breaking that down and correlating it to your finances from day one, it makes finance a breeze. Okay. But if we start doing it midway through, then it just becomes extra work because you're like backtracking.
Because I know that for a lot of project managers and operations managers as well, when you mention project budgets, it's like their hairs are standing, on their arms. It's like, oh, but there are definitely ways to make sure that we are staying on track. Also, there are softwares out there, right, that can help you doing that, no? Are there any softwares that you would recommend to help you stay on track with your project budgets?
Yeah, I mean, I don't ever say to anyone, use this software, because it's always a personal choice, right? I mean, it's even with project tracking of tasks. I don't tell anybody use this particular software, but as long as you can break everything down and it's really simple, the key to really good tracking software, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet, as I said, whether, as you know, Beebole sponsoring this, so whether it's Beebole or anything like that, it's about, is it easy to use? Have you broken down what you needed to break down so that you can make the correlations when you're monitoring the progress and you're seeing how it's being done? And it's not just about you as a project manager or finance manager taking a look at it. Is it easy for the end user to be using? Because a lot of times when it comes to finance, particularly in projects, it's not just the capital costs, right? Of, oh, I have this particular item that I have to purchase and I have to install it, whether, let's say, it's a piece of machinery or something. There's also resourcing costs too, right? Time is money. So whether that's, someone from a software developer's time, like that becomes really important, and it has impact on the project too, because you need to understand how much effort and energy is going against it, because that's part of your budgeting and your finance too.
Absolutely. And I just want to highlight this, what you said, time. Time is crucial when tracking how much time is spent per project. It also equivalates to the overall budget, no? So here, I also want to mention that with Beebole, You can track with your projects by project, sub-project, and task, and also billing and costs per client and per project, which makes it quite easy to make sure that you're kind of staying in the line, with your projects. But I want to now circle back to closing your projects. We moved away from that topic a little bit. So what are the first steps that you would recommend for closing out a project budget at the end of the year?
So obviously you need to have, again, depending on how you set it up. So if you're the only person who's monitoring the budget, it's going to be really easy. If you have a large project that has multiple stakeholders because of different departments, managing a budget from them that you're overseeing collectively, then you need to organize that. So ultimately, it's always, do you have all the invoicing coming in? Do you have all the expenditures that you have to track? So it's really putting out the feelers as to who do you have to reach out to in order to get that. Do you have team members who have to submit their final hours? As well as, here's kind of the tricky part too, your project may not close perfectly at year end. Your project may continue into the following cycle, right? So then you have to talk about, okay, accruals. Now we have to accrual time. So it's not just, again, if it was year end and your project was aligned with the year end closing it out, it actually makes it super simple and easy. Okay, everybody, just submit all your final hours. Do we have all the final invoicing? Let's put it against, our tracker to see how we're doing and what do we have left over so that we can report that up to finance and we can say our project was on budget, on track, all that fun stuff, right? If you set it up in the beginning, it's great. When you have projects that go into the next fiscal year and it's still ongoing, well, then you have to accrue stuff. But not only that, you then have to estimate, what do we think we have left? Because that accrual is going to be moving into the next fiscal budget, but it's also, depending on how organizations set it up, it's usually, there's like a little link to the previous budget too, because you have to know in the future when something pops up again, similar to this, how much did it cost us to have this project run? We're going to have something similar. So it's from, you're working on stuff today to clean it up so that in the future you can review stuff from the past and learn from it to build a better, more efficient related project, financing, budgeting, charter, all that fun stuff.
It's always a learning curve.
Absolutely.
And what are some strategies for managing unexpected costs in a project? Because I'm sure that they do come up.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Risk, because usually unexpected costs relate to risk. Okay. A risk came to fruition and we didn't expect it. Oh my goodness. So, it's interesting. So there's the first and foremost, whether it's a project, whether it's an initiative in an organization, is you really need to do your due diligence in the beginning to vet out as much as you can. There will never be perfection. So you're never going to have a perfect project that's going to predict everything, and therefore you're not going to have unexpected costs. You will always have unexpected costs. I always say it's how big is the gap in that sidewalk that you're walking on, right? Because that's the project, the journey. And is it a gaping hole, right? That unexpected cost? Well, usually gaping holes are because you didn't think things through. Or is it a crack in the sidewalk that you happen to trip over and you just caught yourself and then you're still moving forward in your journey? So the preparation up front of really being clear with what you're going to deliver, thinking it through, thinking of everything that it needs to be needed, purchased, time monitored. So this preparation aspect. But on top of that, doing some risk management, some risk analysis. Because that's the other aspect to budgets too, is when we do have budgets or these unexpected costs is because a risk popped up, whether we realized it or not, and now we're dealing with it and have to address it. And so that's where you always want some contingency funds too. And in the ideal world, I always do a little finger cross, hopefully an organization will understand that and give you a budget for contingencies. But then if they don't, you then need to prepare, okay, like how is this going to impact your project? What additional funding do you need? So if you actually do your risk mitigation planning up front and try to predict what some of those are, then in the beginning of the project, you can say, look, this hasn't happened yet. We're hoping it doesn't happen, but if it does, here's the ramifications for it, and we're going to need some funding. So not only that, you're now preparing for some potential funding. So people have energy and effort and time to find out where that potentially could come from if it should come to fruition, particularly if you identify it as a high level risk. So this is where you start using the other tools in business and in projects to really help you with your budgeting, because the last thing you want is for something to come up, which is going to derail the deliverable of your project because you don't have contingency funding for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, usually there are sometimes, unexpected costs. And this is actually really interesting now because I'm sure that like a lot of project managers are now preparing for the budget for the new year as well. So this is really, really good tips to make sure that you have a plan from the beginning, and prepare yourself for unexpected costs.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you can feel it feels overwhelming. It's like, my goodness,
Mm-hmm.
the project hasn't started yet, or this initiative hasn't started yet. How can I predict or plan what's going to have happen? You just have to remind yourself and break things down into manageable chunks, because
Mm-hmm.
budget budgets are numbers. So the only, and numbers, I love numbers because they're, it's the number, what you're working with. So in order to have the right numbers to know what you're working with, you have to be able to break down. So even though it may feel like I don't have enough information to do what I'm doing, it's like, whoa, actually you do. You may have to reach out to a few individuals to figure out, hey, I'm working on this initiative. In your past experience, what have you experienced, so that you can maybe capture that? What were those potential costs, so that when you create in the new year your new budget and your new plan around what you're executing, you can actually have a more realistic expectation around that. And the beauty is this: if you did that and the budget now is huge, because you did this because that happens, right? I see it all the time, like, because people want everything, right? Then that allows for you, because you've done it up front, to go, wait a minute, if budget really is our constraint, then what do I have to take away from the scope perspective in order to make sure I'm on top of that budget? And the only way you can do that is with that, preparation. Get that charter, get that scope statement, talk to a few key subject matter experts to set you up. And then once you understand what that's all going to cost you from a budget perspective, you can then start negotiating with senior executives, the sponsor of the project within the organization, to see what exactly are you truly going to deliver with the budget that they're willing to give you for that. Because it really does come down to money. Can we or can we not do this? Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it really comes down to. And that's why budgets are so important.
Exactly. And now in the ideal world, let's say that you do have, you don't go over budget, and you actually have some remaining funds at the end of the year, or unused budget. So how should project managers handle this unused or remaining budget at the end of the year?
I'll be honest, it's a catch-22.
Okay.
Depending on the organization. And I say this because I've seen this in organizations where people were penalized the following year for having money left over in their budget.
Okay.
Which I think is terrible, actually.
Yeah.
because then they're being penalized because they didn't forecast properly, right? So and it's like, well, wait a minute, there's money left over. We saved you some money because we were effective and efficient. And now when I'm asking for the new budget for the new next year, I'm being told, well, you didn't use that money, so we're giving you less. It's fascinating. And that to me is like, well, whoa, wait a minute. Why would you do that? Well, sometimes it's because companies are just trying to save money and cut costs. And if they're like, okay, well, you didn't need it before, I don't have to give it to you now. It helps me out for another department that needs to do it. So it is a catch-22 thing. So I hate to say it, I've seen some people just spend the budget so they can have the budget for the next time, which to me, I think is not the right thing to do. It's like, if you're effective and efficient, then you should be rewarded for not spending all of your budget. You shouldn't be penalized for not spending all of your budget. But that's a whole different beast. And that's a culture organization.
Yeah.
We're not going to solve that here or anything like that. But if you do find yourself that you have money at the end of your project that you didn't expect, then you just need to share that with your finance team member. You need to share that up to the finance executive. Sometimes you just close out the budget and here's the remaining funds, and that funding can go elsewhere or maybe to another project, or maybe at the end of it, I've even said, hey, we have, if it's not a lot, can we do a celebration party for the team who did an amazing job, for this particular project.
Okay. And when it comes to these variances, so how can project managers effectively review and assess budget variances at the end of the year?
Well, the variances are usually because of what you projected, you planned budget versus actual budget. So those variances come from that. It was very interesting. Variances tend to be because you didn't, you predicted either too much time for a consultant that you were going to come in, too little time, and then therefore you needed more time from them. I remember in COVID, that variance was huge because cost was just out of control and you didn't know one day to the next what things were going to be. So it was, I remember like that was a difficult time for a lot of people trying to predict on budgets, because you just didn't know, like supply chain, all of a sudden they didn't have it. And therefore you had to wait 6 months, and the demand was so high that the cost went up astronomically, right? And you're trying to predict everything. But if, it really, I say this all the time with the efficiency work that I do and in the project management work. At the end, your variance is a variance. But if your goal is to minimize that variance, then you need to do all of those tasks between the start of the project to the end. And that is, as I said earlier on, really good planning. Plan it out. What do I need? Really good with tracking the time, really good with understanding reporting, because tracking is one thing, but if you're not looking at the information and tracking and building that into your activity, then who cares, right? You need to be able to track it, and something that is quick to track so that you can see those numbers and then you have the ability to course correct. Because a lot of senior executives, they do want that information in regards to the budgeting. Like, where are we, right? Can you tell me as of today, like literally right now, are we on track with our budget? Not. And so that's why having a really good tracking tool is really important. And depending on how busy you are, if you can have something that's already a pre-made dashboard, then that is going to be really, really helpful.
Exactly. And this is why we always say tracking time is extremely important. I think I think there's a lot of, I wouldn't just say project managers, in general, business managers that take tracking time for granted. And I know that it's a legality in many countries. It just has to happen that, employees have to track their time, but it actually helps so much with staying on track with your project, knowing where your time is going, at which project, which task, how much time is one task taking, are we on budget on each project? So really happy that you mentioned this.
Yeah, it's so critical, because I've been on projects where it's so easy. We sometimes go, why do we have to track our time on what we do within a project? Because that project is usually going to a client most of the time, right? And that client was told, here's the cost of the project. And that cost was developed by reviewing what the needs were and looking at some past data. And that's why tracking of time is really important, and that planning in advance is really important, because you need to have an understanding as to what is it that everyone's expecting. And you can't, this is my personal opinion, you can't say to a client, here's what the cost is, and then, oops, we didn't plan properly, and therefore you now need to pay more money. That's non-value added in my world. And I'd be very upset if I was on the receiving end. So it does become really important, even just for the future client projects. Okay, how much time did we take? I had a project with a client that, they tracked, okay, here, Adriana, we need you to do A. And then we did some digging and we realized, oh my gosh, this is bigger than what everyone anticipated. And it was sucking up my time. And I said, I had to back off and go, okay, we really need to reevaluate the scope of everything, because the budget is going to be spent like literally in the first quarter of this, and you're going to have no other additional money. So we need to reevaluate what the scope is of the project. And that's why budgeting time, really understanding what it is and we're spending, and not assuming that everything's going to be, taken care of, because it brought the conversation forward, which actually shifted the direction of the project because budget was the constraint.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely agree with this. Thank you so much for explaining it in this way. We actually have one question here in the chat section by Katie. So Adriana, you mentioned reports. What reports do you think project managers need to be running and analyzing?
So I'm a big believer in simplicity and less is more, because I go into many organizations over 17 years of having my consulting company, and that's one of the things I see is that there's too many reports and not a lot of people are actually looking at them. So if you're going to have a report, you need to make sure it's of value. So as a project manager, time. Okay, how are we from plan time to actual time that we're spending? That's really, really helpful. So I break that down in a couple of ways. I take a look at that from a standpoint of the actual activity milestone deliverables that we're doing. And depending on the project and who we're using, if we have third-party suppliers and they have a statement of work and they have X amount of time that they're giving toward this project, I then need for them to start collecting their time. And I need to see where is it that we said we're going to agree to, because I've asked them to kind of break down their thought process as to how much time it's going to take for requirement A, B, C, D, right? Because they have to put in an SOW. I find with employee time, it's some companies will record that and a lot of companies don't. So that's why we always take a look at not only the time itself, but the activity time too. So time is a big one. Are we on track with the deliverable? So not just the amount of time it takes, but are we on track with that deliverable as well? Because that's all related to, are we on track, not on track? Are we delivering to the scope of it, or have we added some new things to it? So I have to kind of take a look at those. So I really try to focus around the reporting of what we're trying to do. We've hit our milestones. Here are milestones. We're on track with milestones. Here's our timing that we set in regards to resources. We're on track with that. Here's a budget. Here's a planned budget versus actual budget. We're on track or not on track. And I really try to keep it simple. Is it green, red, or yellow? So green means totally on track. Yellow is we're having some issues here. I may need some additional assistance, whether that is by reevaluating some things, budget, resourcing, whatever that may be. But we're in the process of dealing with that. I may have to escalate it. And then red is like something just came to fruition and we need immediate help. But again, I never get worried about reporting, because it's your job is not about reporting. Your job is to get the task and deliverable done. You just need to have those reporting so that you can understand what's going on, but then you have to address it to senior executives as well. So keep it very simple. Not only that, ask them what they want to see too, because sometimes executives and steering committees and sponsors have specific things they want to look at. So find that out from day one and build it into your process. And if you find they're asking for, too many things, then negotiate with them, because you have to run the project.
Exactly.
I hope that helped, Katie.
And actually, just out of curiosity, where do you run your reports? Do you do them in the spreadsheets or Excel, or how do you personally run your reports?
I run them in Excel. I'm a big Excel person, and I'll tell you why, because a lot of organizations just have access to it. And as a consultant coming in, I'm in so many different organizations. Not everyone has the same software. But I've had organizations that have had reporting software that they were able to use as well. And I mean, I actually take a look at Beeble's stuff, and it's actually really great from a timing perspective. I was really impressed by it, like, how individuals can go in and do it. So, I mean, if a company had that, I would totally be hopping on that and saying, hey, please do that. So for me, in my experience, it really is dependent upon the client and what their needs are. And we usually set that up in the beginning to make sure that, again, the client, their needs need to be met. So how do we ensure that that happens?
Perfect. Thank you so much for clarifying this. I have another question about the future. So people are now probably preparing for next year's budget.
Absolutely.
And what should project managers consider when planning a project budget for the upcoming year? I think we already kind of touched upon that a little bit, but is there anything else that you would like to mention in regards to that?
Yeah, I mean, take into account trends that are happening. So again, it's going to be dependent upon what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So what your project is doing. So, you have to take into account trends. Like a really good example is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence can do a lot of amazing things. So in the past, if you had on your project, you had to do a lot of, let's say example, copy work, or maybe some marketing project you're doing, and you had copy work that you had to do. Sometimes you can help your cost of an external copywriter by still having them involved to quality check things, but maybe you have someone internally that you're not worried about the timing of what they do, or even a coordinator who's helping, who can maybe use AI to help with the benchmarking of it. So that's now changed your approach as to how you're going to be doing things moving forward, which actually may lessen your cost than it did, let's say, a year before or 2 years before, if you're looking at past data. So definitely look at trends because you want to see if you can utilize any of those trends. You definitely want to speak to people. If there's any past, this is why documentation is so important. This is why you have to do timing. You have to understand the reports, because you have to look at past information to really help you prepare for the future. I can't tell you how many times I've had projects that are similar, not delivering the same thing, but similar in nature.
Okay.
And that I just look at it, and because I knew and I reported and I tracked things like time and milestones and how long it took and how many people and how much time did I need from that particular resource, then I was able to look at that. And because now I understand what I'm doing, maybe there's some additional deliverables in there, I now can use the past information to really guide my decision-making as to how and what I need for this future project. And it actually allows me to be more laser beam, not perfect, because I'm not looking at a crystal ball. It's still some guesswork going on here, but I'm closer. I'm closer to the bullseye. I'm closer to the bullseye. And that's really what we want, because I promise you this is why understanding your finance is so important and tracking it as you go. I'm too busy doing too many things to get my project deliverable to fruition. I'm dealing with people and dynamics and team dynamics and challenges and issues and approvals. And that's all energy and effort. The last thing I want to be doing is now worrying about my budget and finances. It's the last thing I want to be doing because they're numbers. And if everyone just follows the process and inputs the information, and that we build it in regular quality checks, it makes such a big difference. So that when you're at the beginning, the middle, the end, someone wants some information, or you're at the year end trying to, finalize it all, it's an easier activity. It's an easier activity, because I promise you, we are all so busy in business that the last thing you want to be doing is having to do more digging because you didn't prep it properly and you weren't monitoring it consistently. That's all.
I understand. I actually just want to go back to the trends part, because this is very interesting that you mentioned this. I was wondering, how can project managers be up to date with these trends? Can you recommend any ways that they can stay up to date?
Yeah, go to my YouTube channel. How's that for a self plug? I didn't mean it in that way, but yeah, I mean, look, I'm always looking for what's happening in the next year. What do we have to focus our attention on? AI is a big one, and that's evolving and changing continuously. So don't ignore that one. And it's not just about AI and how it can help you with a specific task. It's also, if you take a step back, how it's going to impact the workforce. And one of the things that we need now more than ever are strategic decision makers, critical thinkers, because the trend is tactical stuff is going to be really, AI probably can track your finances as well, right? I mean, it's not about me physically tracking it. It's me being able to look at the data and being able to pull out the information and go, okay, what's being said here? What is it that I need to do? What course correction do I have to have? Is there anything from a perspective that I see a risk is popping up because of, that information that I'm analyzing? So that to me is probably AI. Keep your eye on and your finger on the pulse.
That's very interesting. AI in finance. I think that would really help. Like you mentioned, you don't really want to spend your time constantly hovering over numbers, no? So if you can find a tool, an AI tool that can help you with that, I think, it's.
But I always say this with all technology and all tools, or all software technology, they are tools, and we still need to have our finger on the pulse. And that's why it's so important to make sure that whichever tool you use, that you're still looking at it and analyzing it. And if you do a little bit of it, it's going to make your life easier. You don't want to be hopping into a system and going, oh my God, there's something wrong here. Holy smokes. When you could see the trend was happening 2 months ago, right?
Yeah.
Like, that to me is like, okay, where in the heck did critical thinking come in? Where in the heck did analyzation come in? Like, that's why you do a little bit and you analyze and you see where the trends are going.
Absolutely. And this is also where I want to mention the deliverable, because the deliverable actually does just that, the newsletter. It combines all the trends and news from the project management, project performance, and for finance controllers as well, when it comes to anything around project financials, and it combines them together, and each month subscribers are getting sent the updates. So I think places like this as well are really great ways to get news and stay updated with trends. So trends is for me a huge point here as well.
Yeah,
it's true, because it's changing very fast. The tech stack for project managers as well. So it's important to stay on top.
Yeah. And if you can find a resource like that that's giving you that information, do it. Sign up for it. Glance through it, get the insight, because all that is gonna help with your decision makings today as well as in the future.
Absolutely. And when we focus on you a little bit now, so what is your process personally of forecasting project expenses for the new year?
So I touched upon it earlier on. I'm a big, I have a practical project management course. I have a way of working that has shown consistently the repeatability and the effectiveness. I get complimented on the time on it. And so, when I'm trying to figure out and forecast, it's really what I said. I get really clear with what it is that we're going to do. So I get really clear with the scope statement. I get understanding the details of what's in and what's out. I have an understanding of the milestones that the sponsor and steering committee may want everything to be done in, because that impacts cost, right? If they want everything done in a short period of time, then I may need more people. Or right. But if they're willing to spread it out, then maybe I don't need more people and I can do with that one. Therefore, my costing. So cost is an end result of what you're going to do. And what I mean by that is, I know cost may be your constraint, but in order for me to know what my cost is, I have to be really clear with what I'm going to do and the timing I'm going to do it in, because that's going to impact whether I need more people, less people, a consultant who's going to be more money. Can I do it internally? So really ironing out all of those sort of expectations and then transferring them into a charter, a project charter, which even goes into a little more in depth. And then sharing that with senior executives. I'm not even talking about the project team yet. Senior exec and getting buy-in. Are we all bought in? And in that process, I also do a priority matrix. What's important? Scope, time, or budget? What's a constraint? That is so critical, because if my scope of what I need to deliver is a constraint, and let's say budget is to optimize or it's flexible, then that gives me a lot of freedom to do other things. But if they tell me my budget is a constraint, then I need to know that, okay, I may have to pull back on maybe some of the timing I want to get it done on, or maybe I have to take out some of the scope elements. So that's why really getting clear with what you're going to do and please do the initial work. It is so worthwhile. It may add on 2, 3, 4 weeks of stuff that you need to do sometimes to get really good, solid information. But I promise you that time is you're going to speed up really quickly because you've really thought it through and you have minimal gaps. And doing that risk assessment, so that's the process that I do. I really get clear with what we're going to do. And then I get all the budgeting associated with it. And because now I have the priority matrix, I'm really clear. I then share that with the team with the kickoff and we go, okay, guys. And then at that kickoff, if I have people, here's how we're going to track our time. All right, here's how we're going to track the budget. And if it's a really big project, I may have certain leads who have to be responsible for their portion of the budget. And then we put in a cadence and a sequence for them reporting those budgets and where they're at. And obviously at that point, if I have quite a few people, I may also have a finance person involved too. So depending on the scale of the project, but it's not just have a spreadsheet and track your budget. Yeah. It's so much more than that. It's like thought process, put it together. Have you thought things through so that your budget is real? Because I've dealt with a lot of unrealistic budgets and it's like, oh my God, let's blow that up because that's not even close to what we have to do. And I'm telling you now, because I've done all this heavy lifting for you and I'm showing you, I'm not guesstimating, I'm showing you. So what do we have to take away or what do we have to add in? And that at the beginning is so much easier to deal with than midway through a project. Because I promise you, senior executives will not be happy at that point. To be like, where were you in the beginning that you did not have this done? No, it's a catch-22 because they all want it done now. What do you mean you want 4 weeks to plan? Yes, I'm telling you, you're going to be happy that I did this.
I feel like there's always a catch-22. So in a way. Okay, so we got some really good questions in here. So Carlos is asking, how can XP&A leverage the process of closing project budgets for the new year?
Okay, I'm going to be totally open and vulnerable here. Can you please tell me what XP&A is? Can you give me the abbreviation?
Not sure if Carlos is online, but let's see. Let's see what.
I know, totally being vulnerable here. Listen, guys, I know a lot.
Extended planning and analysis. Extended planning and analysis goes beyond the boundaries of traditional financial planning and analysis, FP&A.
Okay, so I think it's aligned with what I was saying before. Planning and analyzing what you're going to be doing at the beginning is so critical. So absolutely, if you've done all that good heavy lifting, then it's just going to make closing out a project easier because in essence, you've already done all that deep dive and everything has just been tracking accordingly. So look, I think we know plan. If you haven't done more, plan again because it really does help.
I think planning.
Thank you, Carlos. You just said it. He said it in the chat. Extended planning.
Yes, exactly. No, but this is really applicable to everything. No, planning is stage number one for everything, for anything to be successful. If it's a project or if it's something else, or a campaign, for example, in marketing, let's say, planning is
everything. And it's interesting too, because I think with finance, like I do a lot of work in finance departments, like projects, when we do improvement projects and stuff like that. And this is heavy, like the extended planning and analysis is like huge in finance departments. Like when I compare it to other departments, everyone does some planning, but nowhere to the depth that they do forecasting and all that stuff in the finance, because there's so much more that they're looking at as well. So again, it's never going to hurt you. I always say this though, because too much of a good thing can also have its negativity. So sometimes I see too much planning where you don't move forward, or I see too much analysis where it's analysis by paralysis, or I see too many reports where, and no joke, I have some organizations where people are spending the last 2 weeks doing reports for the end of the month. So 2 weeks to do work and then 2 weeks of doing reports at the end of the month. And then the cycle is every single month. And then when I ask them, because I come in, because they usually ask me to make it more efficient, I'm like, well, who reads these reports? They can't tell me. And they don't even know if there's value to it. So I say that with a grain of salt, because I think what we're talking about is important, but we also have to bring in the efficiency lens. Is it value? Is it value add? Or what we're doing, is it non-value? Is it just, without us realizing it, busy work because we've always done it this way, right? That becomes an interesting question, right? So, look, every organization is different. So you really do have to take a look at what needs are to understand, yes, we need all this. But I always say, if you have I've come across this 100 reports, you better tell me who's looking at them and what decisions are being made. And if they are not, then you should really analyze of canning them. Because if you really need that report, you should only use the latest data anyway, right? Because that's really going to help you. And so you can gather that information. So it's an interesting, yeah, there's balance. There's balance in everything.
Okay, we have some more questions. So next one is from Joaquin, who said, from your experience, what would be a good regular budget reconciliation process?
Yeah, so I do process improvements all the time. So I say this with a grain of salt. Every organization has their nuances. So what I'm going to share with you is very general and high level. Because again, it may work for some people, it may not. So for me, whenever you're doing reconciliation, again, you don't want to reconciliate at the end of a cycle. You always want to be reconciliating at some sort of agreed upon repeatable cycle so that you can understand where things are. So if things are getting off track, you can pick up on that. Or if something's occurring which is completely wrong and off from a budget perspective, you can correct that. You don't want to wait to the end, right? Like that's why in agile methodology, they actually do these iterations and they're constantly planning, doing, testing, releasing, and then they take the next set of requirements and they do that too. So it's a similar process when it comes to budgeting as well. So for a project, as a project manager, I actually talk about this. So we not only have a regular cadence and a process for updating on our activities and tasks, is also those who are responsible for budget. It's combined in there with that. Okay, guys, here's our budget. You're responsible for this. Here's how we're going to be making, tracking it, and how you're going to reconcile it with me. I need these invoices, etc. I probably got that from finance person who says we need this from a tax perspective and all this other stuff. You got to look into that stuff too. And then you start up the cycle. So whether that, you're using a tool like Beebole or whether you're using an Excel spreadsheet, whatever that may be, and then you have people continuously be populating it. And you be on top of it. And if someone's not populating it, you don't allow them to slide, because you know how hard it is to take your expenses that you haven't done in a long time and to sit down and do it all in one sitting. It is painful and difficult. And you do not want that in the project, because we're talking with bigger things that we have to deal with. So that's the process that I would put in place. And I think the big thing is me following through and making people accountable. And if they're not filling it out, I would literally, if we're in the office, I'd knock on the door or I do a virtual call and say, okay, I really need you to do this. And first of all, not assume that they're not doing it because they don't want to do it. I would probably ask them, hey, I just noticed you haven't filled this out yet. We have a process in place. Can you please share with me? Is there something going on that you're not doing? And they're like, oh, it's really, I just got this other stuff. I'm like, okay, I get it, but it's critical. We have to get this done. And here's why. And because you're probably doing some reporting as well. So that would be the process that I would take.
Yeah, so Joaquin actually said that this is especially for small companies, as the company he works for is always so time consuming, and that's always it. So yeah, I see. And another question from Carlos. I think tools are really popular here.
Of course.
Which is actually very interesting, because I've been actually on Reddit and opening the can of worms, and it's very interesting how many people, project managers in general, are asking for tools and looking for recommendations. So Carlos asked, what kind of tool software do you use to close project budgets? Can you just do it with an Excel, or is there a combination of tools that you would recommend?
Yeah, it's, I wish I had the answer to say to do this, but it depends on the company.
Yeah.
Because some companies have SAP systems and you got to close your budget out in SAP. And it has a very specific way of how you're doing it, right? So you have to do it that way. That's how they close out their budget. So you'd have your spreadsheet, and then you'd have to make sure that everything is closed out properly in SAP. So, again, it's just dependent upon what you need to do. So as a project owner, if I have a budget, whatever tool I'm using, I'm probably using an Excel spreadsheet to kind of collect that information. I would look to close it out there. I'm fine with that. I also program my Excel spreadsheets, so they're not just a static sheet. I actually have color coding, conditional formattings, all of that stuff, so that I can see. I use the visual aspect of it. Now, I have some knowledge on that, but for people a lot of people don't have that knowledge. So that's where you want to find like a tool like Beebole or something that you can look at a dashboard in order to figure out what it is. The next step with all budgets, again, if you're not the finance person in the finance department, which usually has the final say on how budgets are closed off, because they're usually linked to taxation for the organization, that usually accountants need to deal with, and usually get your lawyers involved in it as well. So you're not closing out those budgets, but you have to report into them in order to, so they can close out their budgets, because they have to do all of that yearly. So yeah, it's dependent on the organization. Definitely whatever tool you're going to use, and do your best to close out everything in your own budget. Yes, you can use Excel. But again, your company may have something else that they want you to use. So you have to find that out.
Thank you for the explanation. I think we have maybe time for one or two more questions. So if you still have some questions for Adriana, make sure you write them now. I think for me, one last question would be, what metrics or key performance indicators, KPIs, do you find most valuable for tracking project financial health? I mean, we already mentioned some of them. Is there anything else that you would add to that list?
It's interesting, because as a project manager, I'm taking a project manager's perspective. I'm busy. So simple is best. And I always go project plan versus actual. That's as simple as I do it, because there's a whole bunch of other things that you can do and track, but you're getting into the complexity of it. And I find when you're doing those types of, they're formula related. I'd have to quickly take a look to go, oh, what are those formulas again? I think it's like SVP or anyway, I'm digressing a bit, but those, if that's what you need to do, then you go ahead and you do those. But honestly, simple is best. You just want to know, because let's be honest, it's a project. You've been handed a budget, right? And you already know where that budget is being allocated to. So did you plan it accordingly? Did you do your project plan budget versus actual? And that's for everything, right? Your timeline. Here's what I planned. Here's the actual. Okay. Resourcing. Here's what we planned. Here's the actual. For deliverable, here's what we planned. Here's the actual. Because I have come across projects where the deliverable shifted and it changed from the initial insight. It got approval to go in that direction, but as things popped up, you actually saw it. Here's how many risks we have. So I always, the simple, the better, because there's so many other things that I'm focusing my attention on, that it's really easy to get caught up in looking at documents versus doing the work. And so it's just a balancing act, right? That's why, as I say, simple is better, less is more. And by the way, simple is hard. Going to simplicity is really, really hard, because you have to sift through it and understand, do I have everything? And you're streamlining. So you're streamlining things. That's why I think a lot of companies have too many reports, because no one's simplifying it, right? They're just adding another one to the mix because they think that's what they need. But if someone really looked at it, it's like, wait a minute, do we actually need all this?
But this is interesting, because you also mentioned before that sometimes project managers actually spend 2 weeks out of 4 weeks working on their reports, no? So if simplicity can cut this time, spending half of the month on preparing
I see that a lot with finance people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's just, and then we wonder, and I know the complaints, I've heard of it too. It's like, it's burnout, right? Because it's a lot of work to create
Yeah,
reports. It's a lot. So if anytime that you can, simplify it and then be really simple with your dashboard, it's huge.
for sure. Adriana, thank you so much. Do you have anything else that you would like to add on at the end now in regards to the topic? Anything else that you would like to say before we close the AMA off?
First and foremost, I want to thank everybody who's here. I think it's awesome that you're here. And for anyone who watches a future recording, thank you too. I think it's great. This is a very important topic. Don't think of budgets in isolation as a budget itself. Think of it particularly as a project manager or even finance, because it's a relationship to projects or initiatives. It's an element which is woven into everything. So that is why having proper planning and setting up everything and monitoring it as you go is so critical to successful and healthy budgets in the end. Because a lot of times I see when that doesn't happen, it's because of there wasn't an understanding of how it's woven in, and it's thought of in isolation, and it's not. Everything costs money. Nothing is free, right? And particularly in business, everything we touch costs. People cost money, right? You got to pay salaries, so budgets is very important, but sometimes it's behind the scenes, and we do need to understand, because it impacts, if we go over budget, it impacts our profitability. And that's, we got to look at that.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Adriana, and thanks to everyone who attended. Like Adriana said, we will upload the recording on YouTube, so you can also watch it on demand. I know that this AMA is rich with a lot of information, so if you ever want to rewatch it or maybe pause to think about things that Adriana said, it's going to be available on YouTube in a couple of days. So thank you all so much for attending. Thank you, Adriana, and don't forget to check out Adriana's YouTube channel for project budget, in general, project management trends and tips, and as well as the deliverable as well for the trends to unused around project management. Yeah.
And if you're wondering, it's Adriana Girdler. It's a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
That's simple. Adriana Girdler.
I will add it in the chat later, so it will be available there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Adriana.
Thank you so much, Elena, and everybody else. Really appreciate it.